Economic sanctions leveled against Russia by the U.S. and its allies are the harshest ever handed down.
Moscow responded with sanctions of its own. Vladimir Putin said they too would ban the exports of certain commodities and raw materials.
Experts saying tit-for-tat sanctions will lead to a significant spike in energy prices worldwide.
Well, the West is not prepared to confront Russia on the battlefield to defend Ukraine, but over the past 5 weeks or so, it has unleashed its financial firepower on the Kremlin. An unprecedented barrage of sanctions, which grows almost daily, targeting Russia's banking system, thousands of individuals, and so on and so on. Russia has retaliated, but its armory is much smaller, except, of course, for that mother of all financial weapons, the gas it supplies to Europe. Both sides are inflicting financial pain on each other, but the question is, who will blink first? Just hours after President Putin ordered the attack on Ukraine, Western leaders retaliated with a massive and coordinated financial attack on Russia.
The UK is announcing the largest and most severe package of economic sanctions that Russia has ever seen.
We will present a package of massive and targeted sanctions.
We have purposely designed these sanctions to maximize the long-term impact on Russia and to minimize the impact on the United States and our allies.
The West's arsenal of financial weapons is vast and varied, and they have been deployed to, quote, cripple the Kremlin's ability to finance the war. The West's biggest move so far has been to freeze much of Russia's foreign currency reserves, controlled by Russia's central bank and held at home and in banks all over the world. In total, $630 billion worth of dollars, euros, sterling, yuan, gold, and so on. Russia still retains control over about a third of its reserves, $130 billion worth of gold inside of Russia, and about $87 billion worth of Chinese yuan. But the West has frozen the remaining two-thirds held in US, British, and European banks. When you consider Russia's attack on Ukraine is costing an estimated $20 billion a day, you can see how access to this money would be very useful.
We will continue on a remorseless mission to squeeze Russia from the global economy piece by piece, day by day, and week by week.
In addition to freezing Russia's foreign currency reserves, the West has also removed many Russian banks from the global financial payment system known as SWIFT, making financial transactions not impossible, but very much harder. They've also shut out Russian planes from their airspace, meaning Russian airlines can no longer fly to or even over the EU, UK, and United States and Canada. And the West has also sanctioned thousands of Russian individuals, including Putin himself, former President Dmitry Medvedev, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and his stepdaughter, who lives in London, and of course dozens of oligarchs seizing their yachts, planes and mansions. All these sanctions and many others have hurt Russia's stock market, which has fallen something like 20% since the attack. It's also affected the currency, the ruble, which tumbled by as much as 38%, but has since recovered. This volatility has caused some panic among ordinary Russians, who have rushed to the banks to withdraw their money just in case.
These consequences are very unpleasant. I'm used to living in the 21st century, where I can just use my credit card. I haven't used cash in 5 years. This will really impact me strongly.
In addition to the big government sanctions, many US firms have halted doing business in Russia, including Starbucks, Coca-Cola, and McDonald's. McDonald's is particularly interesting. It's been operating in Russia for about 30 years and employs 62,000 Russians across 850 locations. McDonald's restaurants are usually run by the franchise operators, but in Russia, McDonald's itself operates nearly 9 out of 10 stores, which means it's been able to close down most of its locations, unlike Burger King, whose 800 locations in Russia are fully owned by franchisees. Burger King has withdrawn all corporate support for them, but can't order them to close. Now, let's look at Russia's financial armory. It looks very different, much smaller, as you'd expect. On March the 10th, a couple of weeks after Western sanctions were first announced, Russia rolled out retaliatory sanctions, restricting the export of around 200 products, things like vehicle and agricultural equipment, telecoms equipment, and timber. But this is all chicken feed compared to its biggest weapon by far, energy, oil and gas. It's the world's third biggest oil exporter and the world's #1 gas exporter. And its grip on Europe is phenomenal. Russia provides the EU with 40% of its gas supplies. For the bloc's most important economy, Germany, make that 55%. Russian gas is so important to the EU that Russia's Gazprom bank, which handles payments to Russia's biggest gas company, Gazprom, was allowed to stay in the SWIFT financial system. And so Russia continues to earn in the region of $500 million a day from its gas exports to the EU. President Trump warned NATO nearly 4 years ago that Germany's reliance on Russia was a bad idea.
It's very sad when Germany makes a massive oil and gas deal with Russia, where you're supposed to be guarding against Russia, and Germany goes out and pays billions and billions of dollars a year to Russia.
So far, Russia has not turned off the taps to the EU, but warns it is considering it. The gas arrives in Germany via the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. A second pipeline, Nord Stream 2, is nearly finished, but Germany is refusing to certify it because of the attack on Ukraine. Russia's Deputy Prime Minister wants to retaliate by possibly cutting off Nord Stream 1.
У нас есть полное право принять зеркальное решение и наложить эмбарго на прокачку газа через газопровод Северный поток-1.
And with that threat hanging in the air, Russia is now demanding that Europe starts paying for Russian gas in rubles, not euros or dollars. A Kremlin spokesman says it's really simple.
No payment, no gas.
No doubt energy is Russia's biggest economic weapon, but it's a double-edged sword, which is going to end up hurting both sides. Europe is now looking to cut its use of Russian gas by 2/3 by the end of this year, and Russia is looking to replace the Europeans by doing more business with India and China. The exchange of financial firepower is clearly going to have lasting consequences. It may even change the world forever. But will it accomplish its purpose to bring an end to the devastating attack on Ukraine? Well, will the sanctions hasten the end to the violence? We'll ask our experts in a moment. But first, let's hear from a woman in Russia, Anastasia Engelgaard. She runs a charity which supported and trained doctors during the COVID pandemic. Her work won her a Forbes Award. But now sanctions have affected the operations of her work, and she has shifted to supporting Ukrainian refugees from the Donbass region. She says sanctions have hurt ordinary Russians, but they've also brought them together.
So basically, yes, I'm the person who suffered from the sanctions on the daily basis. For example, I cannot buy some things to my children, or like some food for them, special because it's really expensive right now. But at the same time, it makes me be more concentrated on what we can do in order to just pass the sanctions without any harm for us. We will become more closer to each other rather than, for example, West think that it will just change our minds or change our attitude to our own country. Actually, I believe, and I see it like personally among my friends, we all become more closer to each other and more blaming, of course, West, not our government.
OK, let's bring in our guests now. And we have Patrick Boyle, Professor of Finance at King's College London. Thomas O'Donnell is an expert in energy and geopolitics at the Hertie School of Governance in Berlin. Maxim Bouev is the Vice Rector of the New Economic School in Moscow. And in Kiev, we have Andrii Dligach, co-founder of the Center for Economic Recovery. Thank you all for joining us. Maxim, I'd like to start with you. Are these sanctions enough to put pressure on Vladimir Putin and on Russia to take the peace talks seriously and to stop the attack on Ukraine?
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. I do think that sanctions work. It's difficult to say whether or not they're enough. It really depends on the severity of the sanctions. We can definitely say for now that sanctions work. It was basically, we see many economic outcomes that we would see, say, back in 1998 when Russia defaulted on its sovereign debt. So we've seen inflation, we've seen collapse of the ruble. I think the real economic effects will come in about like 2-3 months when many companies run out of supplies that they got through the chain of supply. So, but for now, definitely the majority of people haven't realized that yet the severity of the situation. I would put it this way.
We're seeing, delegates from Ukraine and Russia meeting to have, talks. Do you think that these would be not happening? These would not be happening were it not for the sanctions?
No, well, for sure, sanctions as a weapon to basically force the peace talks. It definitely, it is definitely a weapon for sure.
Yeah, we heard earlier from Anastasia Engelgaard that the sanctions are merely serving to unite Russians. The implication being that they won't break Russia, nor will they change Putin's thinking. I mean, it's just one person out of an enormous population. But what do you think?
Well, such an opinion for sure has all the right to exist. But again, I would say this way, but the majority of Russians haven't seen the effects of the sanctions, that the sanctions will play out, the effects will let themselves known in about 2 to 3 months. So for now, of course, due to propaganda and all this stuff, you can say, okay, well, we stand united against the external enemy, all right, but let's see how the story goes in about 2-3 months.
Patrick, you pointed out rightly in a number of your videos that the freezing of Russia's central bank, the foreign currency reserves of Russia, has been the greatest blow to the country. Can you just explain why that's so important?
Well, essentially, Russia will have kept an awful lot of their foreign reserves. They built up, quite a war chest of wealth that would have allowed them to conduct this war. And then all of a sudden, a huge percentage of that is frozen up. It's unavailable to them. And they're left with the reserves that were internal within Russia that are largely in gold, and it'll be very difficult to sell that gold. And so essentially any sort of resupplying or anything like that Russia wants to do, they're unable to do. People cannot transact with Russia. Like a lot of people made a big deal out of the SWIFT thing, but the SWIFT thing is way less important than the central bank being sanctioned, because essentially the way money moves around the world is from central bank to central bank. And so when Russia is locked down like this, it's close to impossible for any products to be bought, any bills to be paid, any money to be moved at all internationally.
In retrospect, it seems astounding that Russia would leave the majority of its foreign currency reserves in overseas banks. Why was it necessary to park them all there, knowing that you're going to attack your neighbor and that the world might turn on you?
Well, it's really just the way money is stored. Like if you have a small amount of money, you can sort of stack up the paper underneath your bed, for example. But when it's billions of dollars, it gets held, like euros get held in Europe at the ECB, for example, or at a big European bank, and dollars get held in the United States. So it's just really the way this money naturally gets held. And essentially it's money that will have been generated from foreign trade, and Russia probably felt safe. We'll say, for example, they do so much business with Europe, they probably felt safe leaving the money in Europe, essentially with a customer nation.
Freezing central banks and foreign currency reserves has been done very infrequently in the past. Can you just tell me if on those occasions they've had the desired effect?
The most recent example is Iran, and it's extremely difficult on Iran. But of course, often the problem with sanctions is that the wealthy and powerful people often have ways of maintaining their luxurious lifestyles while it squeezes the poorest. And that's really what you see in Iran, is that the country is, in truth, a bit of a basket case economy. But the wealthy, politically connected people within Iran still live reasonably well, just because of the nature of the political situation.
Is it still the case that Gazprom Bank is still operating within SWIFT and so is facilitating payments from the European Union to Gazprom of hundreds of millions of dollars every day for Russian gas?
That's correct, because the one kind of major sanction that has not occurred is basically that Europe has not cut off their purchases of oil and gas, well, really gas, largely because Europe is just really reliant on Russia for that product. And there's moves right now, Germany are talking about it, and Poland are talking about moving away from purchasing Russian natural gas. But at the moment, it's sort of mutually beneficial for both sides. Russia wants economic activity to occur, and Europe needs energy.
They want to disengage, but not yet. Neither side are ready for it. Thomas O'Donnell, Russia now wants the European Union to pay for its gas in rubles, threatening to shut off supplies if it doesn't. And of course, traditionally, it's been paying in euros and in dollars. What do you make of that as a threat?
An own goal. In fact, there's a recent announcement from the Kremlin just shortly before this program that they're backing down on that. What's going on is, as your other guests have pointed out very well, it was called Fortress Russia, this $620 or so billion. I would make this comparison. If you remember in World War II, there was the Battle of North Atlantic. Everybody was trying, from the North America, they were trying to send things to supply England, and the Germans were trying to sink the ships with their submarines. What happened here is, by freezing the central bank, they've essentially won the Battle of the North Atlantic overnight in this war. Russia has been deprived of most of their money to pursue the war. Now, he must sell oil and gas. Mr. Putin has no choice. He needs to bring in cash. Otherwise, as your guests have said, the Russian economy internally will be a basket case. Now, the problem is he has to sell it at whatever price he can sell it. And he's going to be running out the back door slowly by slowly as more in the West refuse to take it. And eventually, I would assume, it'll be sanctioned. He has to go out the back door with it to China, to India, and he'll sell it at very low prices. And the amount of money he's getting goes down. He made a big mistake. He threatened, as you asked me, to cut off the natural gas. And he said, what I will do if you don't buy it in rubles. He thought this was a way that the various purchasers would exchange money at the central bank somehow, and he'd be able to, get foreign exchange. No one will do it. The G7 said absolutely no. He threatened because he would be cutting off something like $40 billion a year of his money. This morning, they said, the president didn't quite mean it that way. He meant to deliver to him the plan to start thinking about it. He's back down.
Right. OK. Look, 3 or 4 years ago, President Trump came over to Europe and he warned NATO. He sat across the table from Stoltenberg and he said, I can't believe it. I can't believe that Germany is making all these deals with Russia. And the whole point of this organization is to protect you from Russia. And you're making him richer. He was right, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. So was President Obama before him, and so was President Biden after him. And actually, it goes all the way back to President Reagan.
Is America resentful? Is America resentful? Do they think of Germany as being short-sighted?
I would say, for example, in Washington, I did private interviews with people on these issues, both in the Obama administration and the Trump administration. And I could say, under the surface, with our ally Germany, there was very strong tensions on this issue, that this was a huge mistake and was going to get the whole alliance in trouble. It didn't matter if it was a Democrat or Republican you spoke with.
Can I ask you, you're in Germany, can I ask you about Gerhard Schröder, the previous Chancellor of Germany? He has a very cozy relationship with the Russian gas industry. He's on the board of Rosneft. I think there was even murmuring about him going to be on the board of Gazprom, perhaps. Can you tell me about his decision at the time to move away from nuclear power to Russian gas, ever more so, and whether or not German society is now wondering about that relationship?
Well, yes, German society is wondering. A lot of ordinary people and journalists, if you look at German newspapers, a lot of them have been very reasonable on this, more along the lines of the American position. This was a fixation of the political and a large section of the business class. And there's two bases for it, without getting into too much detail here. There was the historical policy of the Social Democratic Party that eventually almost all the other parties bought into, called Ostpolitics, where in the Cold War, the idea was by having this close relationship on energy, there would be impossible to have a war, and Russia would support the reunification of Germany and so forth. Well, the part about the impossibility of war obviously is not true. But there is another section, and I would say these are more like conservative business people around Merkel. They had no illusions about Mr. Putin, but they also supported this pipeline. When I would speak with them, my assessment is they simply felt it was a nationalistic geostrategy, a realpolitik in their point of view. Mr. Putin's a risk, relying on him for this gas, but we have to rely on him. We can't get it anywhere else so cheap. If it goes through Ukraine, that's a risk because he will launch a war with Ukraine, so we must divert it around. The Americans said no, by going through there, it helps prevent the war. He's dependent on Ukraine. This section of it didn't agree. They threw Ukraine under the bus, and here we are.
Okay, let's go to Ukraine. And Andrii Dligach, it's a very important question, really. Are you satisfied that the West is doing all it can with its sanctions?
First of all, we are very grateful to the West concerning these sanctions, but I should say that it's not enough, because there is still huge Russian potential for continuing this war. And we for sure do not see another variants and other scenarios apart from increasing and improving of the sanctions. First of all, we need the full embargo on Russian goods, first of all on gas and oil. Then for sure we need more financial sanctions and to distribute the sanctions, personal sanctions, to members of State Duma and other politicians and oligarchs from Russia. Then for sure we need to each day, each week, to increase the sanctions and to share the geographic of these sanctions. And we hope that Great Britain, United States will argue United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia and other countries to join this anti-Putin coalition. Then for sure we need the help in order to support business efforts to replace Russian goods with another suppliers, probably with the Ukrainian suppliers, but it's not an obligatory. And for sure we need to improve and increase horizontal sanctions made by global companies. We calculated that approximately 100% of war budget in Russia paid by top 100 international companies by taxes in Russia. I mean, such global companies as Danone, Metro, Ashan, Nestle, and other companies.
Andrii, do you accept that there's no chance that the European Union will stop using Russian gas for quite some time? We've heard from the European Union that the best they can do, they're aiming to reduce their dependency on Russian gas by 2/3 by the end of this year.
Yeah, we understand this clearly. 10 years we are speaking with Germany, for example, that Ukraine has huge amount of gas on our territory. We are speaking about projects concerning gas and oil in Black Sea shelves with French companies and other companies, but still we do not have support from German or French business. So we understand that we will not have such sanctions, real embargo up to the end of this year, but it would be enough if European Union and Germany, first of all, will each day announce increase the level of the sanctions and continue speaking about embargo.
We're probably coming to the last question now, Andrii, and I just want to ask, let's assume that these sanctions have brought Russia to the peace talks and that they've improved the chance of the peace talks being successful. What do you think the peace, if there is an agreement, the agreement will contain? Do you think that Ukraine will offer, or rather accept, and Russia will accept neutrality, Ukraine being a neutral country, NATO, EU? What will happen, do you think?
First of all, this, as for now, we do not speak about European Union because European Union is still the aim for Ukraine, and we still would like to have a very short period, candidate period, and to join European Union in the nearest future. The only option is that Ukraine will agree not to continue our approach to be a NATO member if we will have enough other instruments how to protect Ukraine and Ukrainian borders, given not in style of Budapest memorandum, which is not working, but this will be a kind of fifth article of NATO, and such countries will protect Ukraine from any kind of aggression in 72 hours.
Andrii Dligach and everybody else, thank you very much for your contributions to the Nexus today. Much appreciated, and thank you at home and on your phones for watching. Remember, if you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube, just type in Nexus, TRT World. Till next week then, goodbye.